one soul ring.
Yeah, sometimes I have the pause button. I guess I hit it accidentally, and then so when I hit record, like it's paused the recording even though the recording's active.
When you guys used to record episodes of your favorite show on your VHS tape, would you hit pause record during the commercials so that future you could enjoy it later without commercials?
That's a very advanced technique.
Yeah, I did that, but it was never like
Never
tight. No, it was never perfect. It's better. What I really enjoyed was years later when you could just buy them on DVD. That was
There you go.
I was gonna say, like, what I enjoyed years later was like finding those tapes and watching the commercials and just seeing how like weird the '90s commercials were.
Old commercials are fun.
I do like watching old previews on VHS movies. Old trailers.
Yeah, like I think whenever I recorded something, I wasn't watching it at the same time. I'd be like, oh, that's on, I'm gonna record it, and then like watch it later.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, my brother had a lot of VHS tapes of WWF back when it was WWF still.
Nice.
Yep. Before the World Wildlife Fund
Got pissed.
took it away.
Take down those pandas.
Well, with that, we can start the show. This is Turn One Soul Ring. I'm Kevin.
Hey, I'm Eric.
I'm Riley.
And we have our editor, Ainsley, joining us once again.
Hello, I'm Ainsley.
So that means we're continuing our lore series. So welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be wrapping up our Mercadian Masques series with part 3, the conclusion. Last week we covered the continued imprisonment of Gerard, Tongarth, and Karn, as well as their release, quote unquote. They sort of escaped, actually. We also covered the Women of Weatherlight's trip to Soprazo and their return. And lastly, we discovered that Takara was actually Volrath in disguise after he murdered Stark.
Bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we actually don't know the fate of Takara currently. So we're going to be kicking things off today with Gerard, Tongarth, Sisay, Takara, and 5 other crew members of Weatherlight crew members journeying to find the Bones of Ramos. So at the end of last episode, we talked about how these characters left Mercadia City hiding in a larger caravan. So they're just walking along the plain next to this larger caravan on their jovels, and the other main characters in the story stayed behind in Mercadia City. And obviously, if you want to know more about that, go back and listen to that episode if you haven't, but let's just get right into it. So, early into their trip, Gerard noticed that Takara had been keeping her distance from the rest of the party and riding in the back of the pack, behavior uncommon to the fiery, wrathy woman. So he slowed down, fell into pace with her jovel, and asked her what was going on.
Sup, bitch? My father is dead.
Gerard's eyes grew wide. He stammered.
He's dead?
Murdered in the infirmary. It was one of those Ramotian assassins.
Ramotian assassins?
Gerard echoed amazedly.
The city is rife with them. The guards are worthless. They haven't the first clue where to find the killer.
Gerard's eyes followed the rumpled ground.
I'm sorry, Takara. I shouldn't have intruded on your grief.
Oh, I don't grieve.
She said bitterly.
I never grieve. I only hate. I'm going to corner the man who killed my father. I'm going to wrap my fingers around his neck and rip his throat out.
She turned her gaze toward Gerard. Her eyes were as sharp as poniards. I don't know what that is.
Do you know where the Ramotians hide out?
Pursing his lips, Gerard said quietly.
No, I couldn't help you there.
Jaw flexing grimly, Takara peered toward the front of the caravan.
Aren't you needed up there?
Gerard nodded, nudging his jovel with his heels.
I'm sorry I've intruded on your hatred.
And she's rough hang, I think, Takara.
She's a bit of a buzzkill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I think it's pretty interesting what she says about killing the man who killed her father, because it may all just be like the ruse of Volrath as Takara, but I thought it could, he could be referring to Stark, like, Takara's father, or it could be Volrath's father, Cedar Kondo, and maybe he thought that if Gerard hadn't shown up as a child when he did, his father would still be alive. But if that's the case, it just kind of illustrates how deeply out of touch with reality Volrath was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were buddies, right? Like they had a good bond, Rule and Gerard.
Yeah,
For a while there they did.
It seemed that way. But if he thinks that Gerard is responsible for his father's death, even though like Voul literally killed him himself, that's a little strange. It's like, hey, if you hadn't showed up, I wouldn't have to do this.
Sounds like a real textbook narcissist there.
Because like he could just be blaming Gerard for everything, right? Like he's like, my life is like this now because of him.
Yeah.
So I killed my dad because of him. I did all this because of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Totally.
like because I'm alive, I'm here to do all this stuff. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if Gerard would have just let him fall off that cliff, no problem.
Man, that would have saved the headache.
So, after a couple of days, Gerard's party and the larger caravan split into different directions. The caravan headed north, while Gerard and his party continued west. And they traveled across the yellow plain of Mercadia for 5 more days until they reached a series of mesas they traveled between. And that's where they encountered their first obstacle in their quest. Between the high cliffs sat a stinking fen, and while they passed through it, they were attacked by ghouls. Basically zombies, but harder to kill. Like, you can't just like cut the head off or kill the brain. If you cut the head off, the body keeps coming. If you cut an arm off, the arm keeps coming. So that you kind of got to like just bash them and dismember them. That's how you
like
stop these things.
Blowtorch or something.
Yeah, burning them would be good. That would work. They didn't have any of those, but that would have been good.
Yeah.
Dynamite maybe.
Dynamite.
Todgarth, grab the flamethrower from the back.
So this was when they officially entered Ramos's actual resting place, the place where the Dragon Engine landed after he plane shifted to Mercadia, also known as the Deepwood Forest. The ghouls were Ramos's first line of defense against those that would invade his resting place, and they were actually the risen corpses of victims of the plane shift to Mercadia. So they were some of the people he rescued from Dominaria that didn't quite survive the trip. About 20 ghouls began to rise from the marshy water that our heroes were passing through on Jovelback. Always remember on Jovelback. The ghouls, of course, first went for the Jovels, and even with the combined combat skills of Gerard, Sisay, Takara, and Tongarth, they weren't able to save a single one.
No, the
Yeah.
Jovels.
I love the Jovels.
I'd be more upset that I have to walk now. But fortunately, not a single member of their party was killed. Sisay and one of the 5 other crew members they brought were bitten by the ghouls, but unlike more common stories with zombies in them, the bites in this story don't turn the bitten into a zombie.
It's because they're ghouls, not zombies.
Right. Yeah, I should stop. I should stop saying zombie. So, like I mentioned, all the Jovels died, but 2 of them, lasted through the fight. But they were so grievously injured that Gerard ordered Tongarth to put them out of their misery as humanely as possible. And after they made it through that swamp, they made camp for the night and had planned to get going the next morning, but they found that although the ghoul bites were not fatal, they caused a high fever and other flu-like symptoms, so they stayed at that location for a couple more days while Sisay and the other crew member recovered. I'm not giving names of any of the other crew members because they're kind of just like throwaway characters.
So that
They're just the crew members.
There
Just
you
the red
go.
shirts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It sounds a whole lot like COVID. Got a ghoul bite, then all of a sudden you're getting high fever, flu-like symptoms.
Yeah, and then we just leave you out of the story. You're not important anymore.
We can assume that the ghoul bites are what caused those flu-like symptoms, but I think it could have also been getting like the rotting swamp water all in their wounds, like Sisay and
Yeah.
in the bites. That probably didn't help.
That might do it. Yeah, a few sources of bacteria there. And just rub it in the wound for good
A
measure.
little bit of few staph infections and whatnot. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they're hardy. So once they were moving again, walking this time instead of riding, the route wound through trees of increasing girth and height for 2 more days as they delved deeper into the deep wood. Further into the deep wood. I'll have to edit that out.
I like deeper into the deep wood.
Okay, we'll keep it. So, in addition to ghouls, the Deepwood Forest was home to drummers, beasts, and plants that could all kill. I just wanted to add this for you guys, the Deepwood Drummer. He's one of my faves.
He's fun. Look at him having a gay old
He's
time.
got
Yeah,
they
that
didn't
is-
actually encounter him, but it's a fun picture.
Like I love the vest and the T-shirt. Really, really fits the aesthetic they're going
Yeah.
for here.
Yeah.
It's a nice quilted green vest.
Is
Yeah.
that actually what the Deepwood Drummer is?
Yeah, that's the art. That's the art from the card Deepwood Drummer.
It's fan
It's so-
freaking tastic.
All right.
It's a
Okay.
little bit out of place, but whatever.
Yeah.
It's really hilarious.
This
At least you'll be able to hear those ones coming.
exactly. Yeah.
Ah.
So this traveling through the or going deeper into the deep wood led them to their discovery of Ramos, the long abandoned city that was located in a clearing at the center of the deep wood and was also very close to Ramos's crash site.
Oh, Ramos.
Yeah, I think they named it that after. The city probably had a different name before he destroyed it.
Yeah.
So, after a couple of days of slogging through the deep wood, Gerard's party came to that clearing. The city appeared to be damaged in several places from what looked like sudden and intense heat. Perhaps the heat of a dragon's breath.
Perhaps.
No, I'm kidding. It's not that.
Oh.
Then the party came upon the crater or henge of Ramos. In the center of the crater sat a plateau about 1,000 feet from the outer edge. On the plateau sat a large flat stone table carved with thran glyphs that resembled an altar. The altar held 5 large crystals that glinted in the sunlight. And so they had found the power stones they sought, or otherwise known as the Bones of Ramos. So now they had to come up with a plan with which to retrieve them. Based on the ghouls, they thought that there might be some kind of obstacle or booby trap to stop them from taking the stones, and they were right.
That makes sense.
Do you think that, like, it's called a booby trap because of breasts?
I don't know. I was thinking
No.
about looking that up. Find out the origin of the booby trap.
Do you know, Eric? You sounded sure.
Yeah.
Just because there's other things like calling someone a boob and stuff like that. I think people were using boob and booby before they were referencing breasts, and that's like a newer thing.
That's
Okay.
fair. That's fair. Yeah, because someone who's a boob is sort of like a goof who like
like-
is making a fool
yeah.
of
Yeah, it's like
themselves.
same as calling someone a putz. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look-
So it could be
look-
like a fool,
Yeah.
a fool trap, right?
Yeah.
Like a trap for dummies.
It looks like in English language in the 1590, the word began appearing in English language as booby, meaning stupid person, slow bird.
Stupid
Slow
slow
bird.
bird.
Yeah, the phrase booby trap was originally applied to schoolboy pranks, but took on a more sinister connotation during World War One.
Cool.
No.
Yeah, gas.
Interesting.
Yeah, those gas attack booby traps.
Don't be such a booby,
If some-
you see?
Now, if someone's being an idiot, I want to call them a slow bird.
Yeah.
So Gerard ordered Sisay and Tongarth to accompany him into the crater and ordered the rest of the crew and Takara to wait for them. Which, what else are they going to do, right? I think it's a pretty good plan.
Yeah, and if something happens, they can come in and rescue them.
Exactly. Yeah. So just as they were about to enact their plan, one of the other crew members, who I have named Ilcaster, screamed in pain. When the rest turned to look at the young man, they saw that he'd been ensnared by 2 vines. They were wrapped around his ankles and were tightening. Ilcaster drew his dagger to hack at them, but when he did, he found that they were as hard as steel. Then the young man began to bleed from an artery the tightening vine severed in his leg.
Ooh, oh,
Ow.
yeah.
Yeah. Then another vine gripped him around the throat, and a moment later, his head fell off his shoulders and rolled, stopping at Gerard's feet. Now, naturally, Gerard, Sisay, and the rest formed a defensive circle to ward off any further attack. They were
Wow, just
yeah,
popped his head off.
just
like,
like a grape. And they don't talk.
Oof.
They don't talk. I don't know how much like blood there was with the head. They don't go into too much detail on that. But when it was wrapping around his ankles, it was that probably would have killed him just that way. But anyways,
Damn.
they were relatively successful in defending themselves, except that one more crew member was killed by the forest, which is really terrifying. The ground beneath the crew member's feet began to boil and turn to mud, and he was swallowed up by it. He just kind of sank into it real quick, into like hot boiling ground.
Oh God.
Yeah. So they decided that it might be a good idea to move away from the crater, and when the forest stopped attacking them, they realized that they were surrounded by a different kind of guardian, the Dryads of Ramos, a telepathic group of tree spirits that could take on a humanoid form when they were around other humanoid creatures, like a group of humans, for example.
Cool.
Spicy.
So, attempting to circumvent further violence, Gerard sheathed his sword and held out one of his open-palmed hands in a gesture of peace. He told them that he was Gerard of Weatherlight, and that he and his friends had come to Ramos in search of the Bones of Ramos. None of the Dryads made a single move, but Tongarth absent-mindedly brushed a hand over one of his inverted horns. The sudden movement spooked the Dryads, and the one closest to the Minotaur sang a single note in his direction. Then Tongarth began to sleepily wobble in place before he fell to the ground face first on top of Sisay. But she was fine. She just crawled out from under him. It's no big deal.
It's like this happened before.
And that's when Gerard remembered something he'd learned during his training with Multani. Among tree people, or dryads, sitting down was a sign of peace, much the same way an outstretched hand with an open palm is for us, or dogs. I usually do that with dogs. And that's what Gerard did. He sat down. He told the rest of his party to stow their weapons and sit down. Sisay thought the Dryads might have used their magic on Gerard the same way they'd used it on Tongarth, but when she ordered a couple of crew members to restrain Gerard, he assured them he wasn't being enchanted by the Dryads and that they all needed to sit down at once. So what?
Restrain him.
He's like,
Don't sit down. Don't let him sit down.
Stand it back up.
sit, roll over,
Now make
So
him dance.
play dead.
So once everyone was sitting, the circle of Dryads surrounding them closed until the forest people were only a couple of feet from Gerard and his party. The chief Dryad approached Gerard and extended his hand to the Benalian. Gerard did the same, and the two touched. Sometimes when we touch... It was a gesture of peace, but also a communication technique. The Dryad communicated to Gerard what it was like to be a part of a living forest, telepathically, of course, to be connected to every other living thing, and he told Gerard the true story of Ramos' arrival on Mercadia. The Dryad then pulled many of the experiences Gerard had had since arriving on Mercadia from his mind, and he understood why they had come. You just roll credits right there, I think.
That's so efficient.
I know. These Dryads, I really wish they would have had a bigger part in the story. They could have been really helpful.
I wonder how long that takes. Is it like 10 seconds? Is it like 5 minutes? You know?
I think it does take a little while, because it's in the book, Sisay and the rest of them are just kind of like waiting there, sitting there silently, being like, "What the fuck is going on?"
Yeah.
So
Because you kind of have to you have to go over the memories.
yeah, it takes a bit.
You have such soft hands.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Sometimes when we touch. So Gerard repeated the story of Ramos right then and there to his crew. We mentioned the story in part, I think both in part 1 and 2, a little differently. The details were a little different, but even added to that, there are details that we left out. So just to refresh everyone's memories, Ramos escaped Dominaria in the wake of the Silex blast that ended the Brothers' War. As he was flying away from the blast, he scooped up a group of merfolk from the water surrounding Argoth. Then he picked up a boat filled with refugees, but wouldn't you know it, all those people and merfolk made him too heavy to fly properly. So it's not exactly clear how Ramos plane shifted with the rescued, but the novel says it had something to do with the strength of the blast, sort of like pushing him forward, and the speed that he was already traveling as he tried to escape the blast, and it sent him to Phyrexia. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but you could just say it was magic, I guess, and that just solves that problem.
Hey, that's the game.
That's what's great about fantasy.
That's what the game's called.
Yeah, I guess in modern Planeswalker lore, like that wouldn't necessarily have worked unless like Ramos had some sort of way of like protecting them as they plane shifted, because like living material would just be evaporated in the blind eternities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but if he like wrapped it, if he was like holding it all in his hands, maybe they'd be okay because he's not living.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe, I don't know. Obviously, it works, so it doesn't matter.
It just works, okay?
So
Just go with it. Come on.
So all that, yeah. And if you want to know more about the Blind Eternities and all that, we did do a Eldrazi explained episode back in oh, when was that? I'm not. I think it may be in like the 70s somewhere. I'd have to check.
Yeah, that's a good bit ago.
Just search Eldrazi explained. Anyways, all that being said, the Silex blast did indeed reach Ramos and kind of burned him, singed him. So when he arrived on Phyrexia, he was badly damaged, on fire, and carrying too much weight. So after Phyrexia, yeah, I think we've all been there. Like this has been the summer for me so far. It's been rough out there. So after Phyrexia, Ramos used the erratic portal to plane shift to Mercadia, where he emerged from a portal in the sky, much the same way Weatherlight had. Ramos was on fire, and so were the Dominarian refugees. Seeing the distress of those he'd hoped to save, Ramos's heart broke and fell away from the core of his body. This was the power matrix, and it fell into the ocean surrounding Soprazo. Well, actually, what happened is it falls and knocks the top of that mountain off, and then that's the caldera that they live in, and then it falls into the ocean. But there is an inconsistency here because this part refers to the power matrix as the heart of Ramos, but one of the bones of Ramos is also the heart. So I'm not sure what the deal is. And also, if we go back to part 2, when they're talking about the power matrix, the Grand Vizier calls it the mind of the Uniter. So I don't know. I don't think we should judge Francis Leberon too harshly.
And like the merfolk wouldn't know if it was the mind or not. That's just kind of what they call it, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just because it's all just it's just pieces of just like power stones and shit.
It's like the heart of the ocean.
Like Titanic. Is that Titanic?
Yeah. Yeah, dog. Yeah,
that old lady's a liar.
She's fine.
Also, there was more than enough room on that door for both of them.
Oh, good lord. That's what everybody says. Maybe it would have been. Maybe not. We'll never know.
It definitely. Watch the movie.
I have. I
watched it recently
over and over again as a child. I even have that. I
have the door.
I have. No, I don't have the door. From Titanic. I do have my very own genuine, purchased from Claire's in the mall, Heart of the Ocean.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
You're gonna have to
purchased from Claire.
You're gonna have to put that in the will for baby.
It's genuine, yeah. Still have it.
So, anyways, with the matrix gone from his body, Ramos gently released the merfolk he carried in one hand in the same ocean. The water extinguishing their flames, they became the Soprazan merfolk. Then, as he reached the beach of Rashada, the refugees gathered on the deck of the burning ship he carried, and Ramos gently scooped them from the deck and dropped them on the beach. The sand extinguishing their flames, they became the Rashadan people. Then, as Ramos flew past Mount Mercadia and over the rushwood forest, he reached into the hold of the ship, scooped up the refugees, and spread them across the forest, the leaves extinguishing their flames. They became the Cho-Aram people. That's the one I find least believable, like leaves is extinguishing flames, but I think it's supposed to be kind of like poetic. So
if they're damp.
They could be damp leaves, yeah.
Sure.
So as he kept flying, he reached inside the ship once more and found only corpses. He spread them across the marshes of the deepwood forest, and they became the ghouls that protected his resting place. Which we just talked about. And when there was only the burning dragon and the ship left, Ramos finally crashed into the city that had existed in the Deepwood Forest, destroying it and killing its inhabitants and leaving the massive crater our heroes found there. So he had saved hundreds, but at the cost of killing hundreds of thousands, because it was a pretty big city. And It was that last irony that shattered what was left of Ramos's crystalline core. The 5 Power Stone shards broke away from his core, and he could not rise again. Although he wasn't dead.
He was just sitting.
And feed my fish. Not too much.
It's quite the trolley problem he had on his hands there.
No kidding.
Yeah, like he was flying for so long, but then still couldn't dodge the city.
No, I guess maybe he wanted.
like,
maybe he wanted to crash into the city. Who knows?
It's like, I'm gonna fuck him up.
Like all of these places where he dropped people are very far apart, and then he's like, this city, see ya.
Yeah, I think he was going like super fast though.
Yeah, I
that's
know.
the idea.
In my mind, I'm picturing like he reached into the ship and he's like, "Oh, a little sprinkle of merfolk on the beach." It's probably like, "Shit, grab the merfolk! Oh, shit, grab these guys! Throw them in the forest!
Oh no,
damn.
a city!
Go down!" Yeah,
Yeah, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he was damaged and on fire. So I feel like, we gotta cut him a little slack. Like he landed where he landed. I don't think it was intentional.
Yeah. Also,
Killed hundreds of thousands.
well,
Riley.
he feels bad about it. He feels bad about
well,
it.
if he feels bad about it, then it's fine.
Well, it's something. It's better than it.
Guys,
better
I
than
said
him not
sorry.
feeling
What's the
bad.
big deal?
Yeah. God.
Oy.
So after a while, Ramos did rise briefly to build the altar the Power Stone shard sat on. It was his way of memorializing those who had died when he crashed, those he had killed. He longed to repair the damage he'd done to Mercadia, but without a functioning core, he couldn't rise from his resting place, except that one time when he rose to make the altar. With his tale completed, Gerard told his party that Ramos had invited them below the crater to where the dragon engine rested. Ramos could telepathically communicate with the Dryads, and the chief Dryad could do the same with Gerard, and that's how Gerard knew Ramos had summoned them. So, they walked into the crater toward the altar the Power Stones rested on. Once there, Ramos emerged from beneath the earth beyond the altar. Once he rose to his full height, about 100 feet, he spoke to Gerard.
Hold on, couldn't he not come back without the engine still?
Yeah, but
What's going on?
he's doing it for a second time. I don't know.
Okay.
It's just he's like I've been so tired.
It's my tale. I
Sure.
make the rules.
Yeah, it's about exactly. Yeah. But I had the same thought.
Okay.
Gerard of Weatherlight, you have come to pillage a grave.
Lifting his head, Gerard replied,
No, great Ramos. We have come to fulfill a prophecy.
You forget, Gerard of Weatherlight, that those prophecies are fictions about me. I am Ramos, whom you have come to raise, but I cannot rise, or I would have already. Your ship's arrival in this world, through the very portal I took from Phyrexia, now moved to Wrath, only coincidentally resembles my own arrival. Both of us crashed upon this world. Neither will rise again.
Gerard felt his inside sinking. Ramos knew everything. The Dryad chief had conveyed it all to him. Ramos saw the masquerade and the truth that lay beneath it. Why ever would he allow Gerard to take the sacred stones that had calved from his own power core?
You are Ramos, yes,
Gerard replied.
but perhaps Weatherlight truly is the uniter. Perhaps the prophecies are not mere whimsy.
You do not believe in prophecies, Gerard of Weatherlight.
Ramos scolded.
No, I don't.
Gerard allowed. His eyes remained riveted to the dragon engines.
But I do believe in hope. That's where these prophecies came from. Hope. The people who believe these stories remember how you brought their ancestors here. They remember that horrible day so long ago. They remember the death and destruction, but they have transformed horror into hope. They remember Ramos, yes, but they hope for the uniter. No, these aren't prophecies foretelling what was destined to happen. These are only hopes, wishes for what must happen.
Ramos's metallic eyes peered deeply, sharply into Gerard's soul, but the dragon engine did not speak. Gerard continued.
You built this place as a memorial to the dead, but what about the living? You long to heal the hurt that you brought to this world, and here's your chance to do it. You've mourned the hundreds of thousands you've killed, but mourning is not enough. What about the hundreds of thousands even now who suffer? The Bones of Ramos are only selfish relics lying here. Within Weatherlight, though, they can raise as the uniter. They can bring the world together. They can save those who are doomed.
And that's when Gerard realized that he'd been speaking to Ramos the way so many had spoken to him throughout his life about his destiny and the legacy, and he began to laugh. Naturally, Ramos inquired as to why the man was laughing at a time like this, so Gerard told him.
It's just that I used to be like you, Ramos. People decided I was a uniter. People said I had a legacy. I had a mission to fulfill. They told me I was supposed to save the world. For a long time, I dragged my heels. How does one man save the world? But then I gave up fighting. It was too hard to fight destiny. It was only just now, as I heard my own voice talking to you, it was just this moment when I realized my destiny had caught up with me. Without even knowing it, I'd become everything everybody said I was supposed to be.
Yeah, and then while I'm reading this, I'm like, yeah. So, anyways, Ramos told Gerard that he was right to laugh because what he said didn't matter. He told them that the stones only had power because they laid near him. And if they were moved far enough away, they would lose the dull glow they gave off while they sat on the altar Ramos had erected. And Ramos said,
I understand hope and know it does not die easily. You will not give up until you see for yourself. I will allow you to take these stones as far as the Dryad's Grove. There you will see what I say. They will darken beyond the crater. There will be nothing more than useless shards of stone.
So that's what they did. Ramos was right, though. The stones lost their glow shortly after they reached the Dryad's Grove. The rest of the party was pretty discouraged at that point, but not Gerard. He decided that they would stay in the deep wood with the stones for one more night. He believed that the answer to enlivening the stones lay somewhere there, and he needed one more night to think on it. So, that night, after the rest of the party had gone to sleep, Gerard approached the chief dryad, sat down, and extended his hand in the same peaceful gesture he'd used when they met. The chief dryad mimicked Gerard's movements, and then they touched. So once the two of them were, I don't even know what that song's about. I've never actually seriously listened to it. Once the two of them were sitting across from each other, Gerard removed the heart of Ramos from his breast pocket and presented it to the chief. The dryad held it up, closed his eyes, and made a sound that resembled the single, clear note of a bell. The tone resonated until it filled the air. Then he lowered the hand holding the power stone, and within it glowed a spark of energy.
And then he said, draw me like one of your French girls.
It's like when someone looks at you on the bus and they're like, I have to draw you.
Yeah.
Gerard released a cheer of excitement that woke his friends,
I don't think so.
who came running, which alarmed the chief dryad, of course. They don't like sudden noises or movements. Gerard ordered them to sit and explained what had just occurred. He ordered each crew member who was carrying a stone to pull them out and hand them to the chief dryad. They did, and the chief began to sing. As he did, more and more dryads emerged from the forest to join him.
My heart will go on and on. Is that what they were singing?
That's a good song.
It's a good song.
Yeah. Who is that? Is that
Celine.
That's Celine?
Come on.
Love Celine.
Yeah.
Love Celine.
Love Cher too. They're both great. So the song lasted quite a while, and Ramos himself eventually joined in with his sorrowful cries. Riley, can you give me a sorrowful cry? Yes, he's sad. And as the song continued, it felt like the entire forest was joining in. Eventually, all 5 power stones in the chief's hands began to glow. Not the dull glow they had had while they sat on Ramos's altar, but a bright, shining one. They continued to brighten until gazing at one was like looking at the sun. Also, don't look at the sun, folks. In case you
Yeah,
didn't
at
know
least
that.
not for very long.
No, you can kind of like
You get a
just kind of
glimpse.
Kind of what you would do with a woman's cleavage. I think I've heard that somewhere before. That's sort of how you should look at the sun. Or at least, a woman that you don't know.
You're like, yeah,
Wow.
those are a couple of nice slow birds there. You
Hey.
know what I'm saying?
With the stones back in the saddle again, the song of the Dryad slowly faded. As it did, the glow within each stone dissipated. When the music ended, the Power Stones each retained some portion of their inner fire. With the ritual completed, the Chief Dryad laid the Power Stones in front of Gerard and outstretched his hand to him. Gerard obliged, and he understood what the chief had communicated, which Gerard relayed to his crew.
Ramos has given us his blessing.
He told the crew reverently.
Ramos has joined the Uniter. With these stones, he will return with us to Mercadia.
That's all it took. So, as Gerard spoke, the gathered dryads disappeared back into the forest. Once they were gone, Gerard packed the Power Stones in a single bag, and he told his crew they would rest for the remainder of the night and begin their journey back to Mercadia the following morning. But by the next morning, the bag, the stones, and Takara were gone.
Man.
Don't they
Back
know?
to Kara.
Don't they know she's Volrath? Come on, guys.
Come on, guys.
Don't you know anything?
Come on, Gerard.
While the events were developing in the Deepwood Forest, Hannah was sending Squee on a search mission, his quarry being Weatherlight. We all know where Volrath was keeping the skyship, and Squee found the subterranean hangar after a relatively cursory search of the Magistrate's Tower. So not only would he be able to report to Hannah where to find Weatherlight, he would also be able to report to her that he found many other skyships, ones that resembled Predator. With that task fulfilled, Squee hastily tried to leave the hangar the way he'd come when he bumped into one of his Kieran brethren. It happened to be one of the magistrate's chief advisors, one that Squee had had dealings with earlier in the story. Squee's reaction to this was to turn and run in the other direction, and as he began to pick up speed, he felt something slam across his chest. Then he fell backward, hitting the back of his head on the stone floor of the hangar. It was a Phyrexian dock worker that clubbed him, and the goblin had time to think,
Phyrexians? Here.
before the Phyrexians club struck Squee in the head and left him unconscious. And over the next few days, Squee was questioned and tortured regarding what he knew about his fellow crew members. By that point, Volrath, as Takara, had returned to Mercadia City with Ramos's bones. He was present for much of Squee's interrogation and deduced that the goblin didn't know a whole lot about the whereabouts of rebels or the remainder of Weatherlight's crew. But the Evankar decided that it was better to keep Squee alive as a hostage in case he needed to use him as leverage, as his artificers were still unsuccessful in their attempts to combine either the power matrix or the Bones of Ramos with Weatherlight's engine. And that meant that his next task was finding the two people with the most intimate knowledge of Weatherlight's engine, which were Hannah and Karn.
This image of Karn is
He's a little
So
creepy.
Yeah,
like he's so short too.
Yeah.
Like I
Right.
think that's a lot of the perspective is really off in this image.
definitely. Something that wasn't difficult in his guise as Takara was finding these two, tracking down these other members of the crew. So Volrath, as Takara, found Hannah and Karn hiding in a cellar in the lower city. The two had been there for days while they waited for either Squee or Gerard and his party to return. When only Takara returned with the Power Stones, Hannah's first question was what happened to the rest of the party that had gone to search for the Bones of Ramos. Volrath lied and told them that all had been killed by the ghouls, except for him, of course. Or her, as it were. But it's not just that he told Hannah and Karn that their closest allies were dead, it's how he did it. And remember that he's saying all this as Takara.
Ghouls attacked us. Deepwood ghouls. Tongarth fought 5 of them himself. They surrounded him. He hacked off their limbs, but it wasn't enough. They sank their claws into him. They ripped open his stomach and ate his guts. He fought on. They clawed out his eyes. They split open his head. They ate his brains.
Takara trembled violently and dropped to her knees, burying her face in her hands.
No!
Hannah gasped in horror. Tears streamed down her cheeks.
Killed by ghouls.
Takara sobbed in her hands.
That was just Tongarth. Sisay was... It's too horrible to say.
What?
Karn asked mournfully.
What happened to Sisay?
A wumpus attacked her.
Takara said, shaking her mantle of gleaming hair.
A hulking beast, all hair and claws. It leaped down on her from the treetops. It crushed her body. She split open like a burst sausage.
Oh my god.
It's visceral. And then the wumpus... And then the wumpus plucked her head... I'm sorry, okay. I'm doing this time. And then the wumpus plucked her head loose, as though it were simply a grape. It bit her face in half and...
The horrific account ended with more racking sobs. Through tears, Hannah said,
What about Gerard? What happens to Gerard?
Takara's voice was muffled by her hands.
That was the worst of all.
Tell me.
Hannah cried desperately.
I have to know.
He and I were the only ones who had survived the ghouls and the wumpuses. We reached Ramos. We were gathering the stones from the altar where they lay. Ramos appeared.
Ramos?
Hannah echoed.
He was a huge dragon engine, 100 feet tall, with rending talons and fiery breath.
Gerard was burned alive?
Hannah said miserably.
Worse.
He was ripped to pieces.
No,
Takara said, choking on her tears.
he died of fear.
What?
As soon as the dragon engine appeared, Gerard fell down dead. He died of fear.
He died of fear?
Yes,
Takara shook while weeping.
of course. He soiled himself first.
She lifted her head. In the weird light of the Bones of Ramos, Takara seemed to be laughing instead of sobbing. Her face seemed a hateful, leering mask. She drew a deep, raking breath, and then sobs transformed into gales of mocking mirth. So Volrath as Takara continued to regale Hannah and Karn of, also, I love that she puts that spin on it. Like, not only did he die from just being afraid, but he also shit
And
himself.
then he pooped his pants.
Yeah, it's like, that's such a brother thing to do.
Just to confirm, when somebody dies, they... Oh, I guess it said it was before he should have... Yeah.
Yeah, he soiled himself first. So first he was afraid, he pooped his pants, and then he died.
And then he died.
Yeah.
And there's just something about the term wumpuses.
Oh my
Yeah,
god,
like-
that was
What?
rough to get through.
It's I mean, it's not a creature type per se, but it was on quite a few cards
Yeah,
in the set.
Just like, it's not a very terrifying name at all. And so you're like, oh, a wumpus, that's something really nice.
Squished him like a sausage.
It sounds like something zany. Like a heffalump.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, Volrath as Takara continued to regale Hannah and Karn of Gerard's shameful death as she continued to laugh. At a certain point, Karn had had enough of whatever Takara was doing, and he cold-cocked her right in the face, just punched her real hard, sending her flying like a rag doll across the cellar where she smashed into a pile of old wood in the corner of the room. When she stood up, blood had replaced the laughter that had been coming out of her mouth. She dusted herself off, smiled at the silver golem, and demanded that he strike her again. Karn was still shivering with fury, but he quietly replied,
I want to, but I will not. If I struck you again, I would kill you.
And that's when Volrath transformed from the lithe, red-haired, wrathy woman into the sinuous, gray-armored Phyrexian that he was. With his transformation complete, Volrath beckoned at Karn to strike him again, and the silver golem, unable to contain his rage, leapt at Volrath. The Evankar was too quick, and Karn ended up in the same pile of smashed wood that he'd sent Volrath into seconds earlier. Karn's rage reached its zenith. He threatened to kill Volrath, but by that point the Evankar had Hannah in his grip. He told Karn that if he wanted to kill him, he would have to get through her first. Karn rose, still shaking with fury, but he didn't attack Volrath. He spoke to the Evankar, his words dripping with years of hatred and contempt.
You're a coward, Volrath. You always have been one. Since the time you were Vul, you've always been a coward.
With his face pressed up beside Hannah's, Volrath smiled wickedly.
Perhaps, but what does cowardice matter when one always wins? I always win.
He whistled once sharply, the cellar doors flung back, and down the stairs flooded a regiment of Mercadian soldiers. So once Hannah and Karn were in Mercadian custody, Volrath paraded them through the city streets where Orm saw them before he took them to the underground cavern where Weatherlight waited. Hannah would have preferred to see her ship under different circumstances, but she was pleased to see that Weatherlight was fully repaired. All they needed to do was connect the Bones of Ramos with the Power Matrix, and the Power Matrix with Weatherlight's Thran Crystal, and she would fly again. More importantly, she would be able to plane shift again, which is exactly what Volrath wanted. Hannah and Karn refused to perform the task, so Volrath threatened to kill Squee if they didn't make Weatherlight airworthy. Volrath had strung the goblin up by his wrists between Weatherlight's twin airfoils. Volrath was happy to explain how Squee would die from that.
Squee's whole weight is held aloft by the shackles that bind his wrists. At first, the pain isn't too bad, but every moment, muscles and tendons grow weaker. Circulation ceases in the hands. Shoulders slowly pull from their sockets. Viscera stretches out the diaphragm. Chest muscles grow so weary they can no longer force air outward. Squee will eventually suffocate because he won't be able to exhale. He'll suffocate though his lungs are full of air.
Yeah, it's kind of like being crucified. Volrath further explained that if Hannah and Karn repaired Weatherlight's engine, they could use it to lower her airfoils and save Squee. But if they didn't, after Squee, he'd bring Orm out, and then he has a slip of the tongue or something, because he says after Orm, he'd bring out Tongarth, Sisay, and Gerard. So just like right there, Hannah and Karn knew that their friends were still alive, which I thought was going to come back in a more exciting way, the fact that he lied to them, but it just didn't. It's just, I don't know. Anyway, they had to save Squee and whoever else Volrath had prisoner, so they got to work on Weatherlight's engine. By that point, Orm and Chomano had rallied the rebels of Mercadia City. The group consisted of Ramosians assembled by Lahaim, Cho Aram, Sky Scouts, and Water Wizards, an elite contingent of Suprazan warriors sent by the Grand Vizier, a Rishadan ship crew converted to the cause during Chomano's sea crossing, and bullmen, boarmen, griffins, and other non-human and non-goblins disparaged in Mercadia.
Would you rather be a Sky Scout or a Water Wizard?
Water Wizard, hands down. You're a wizard.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're a water wizard, Harry. Harry, it's your birthday, Harry. Altogether, they were a few hundred strong, and they planned to take control of the Magistrate's Tower, recover Weatherlight, and also take control of the streets. That's probably the most important one. Got to get those streets. And apparently in Mercadia, you can't win a battle if you don't also take control of the markets. And that's where our old friend Atala made a comeback. Being a farmer, he had a lot of farmer friends. Right? That's, you hang out with the people. Anyways.
Yeah.
And all the farmers were fed up with Mercadia City's rule. He promised to fill the markets with farmers and take the bitch. I don't know how they're going to do that. And also, he's a 10-year-old kid. Let's just keep that in mind. So, not to mention rescuing Hannah, Karn, and Squee, and that's why Orm was part of the group that was going after Weatherlight. So, with their ragtag army split into 4 groups, they dispersed and headed for their respective targets.
Do you think Orm and Chomano had a quickie in the woods after not seeing each other for a while before they rallied the army?
Yeah, I think they had a quickie on like the boat trip back to Rashada.
Oh, yeah,
I
they'd
think
have
they
some
had
time.
a quickie like while they were in like that storm flying to Mercadia.
Okay, they
If
probably
they can
didn't
do
need to
that.
have quickies. They could have nice slowies.
Just irregulars. It doesn't have to
Regos,
be slow.
just
Yeah,
reggies.
don't be too slow. Yeah, it's like you gotta be stroking.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong.
So by that point, Gerard, Tongarth, Sisay, and the other 3 crew members had returned from the Deepwood and snuck back into Mercadia City with the help of the Remosian leader, Lahaim. I just want to say, because it sounds like Lahaim.
I know. I always
Yeah.
wanted. I always think L'chaim when I
So
see it.
he brought Gerard and his party to the entrance and left them to find their own way. By the time they started into the tunnels, it was the middle of the night, and the storm the Cho-Aram water wizards were brewing was beginning to take shape. Lahaim was leading his Remosian rebels into the magistrate's tower. Sapraz and Merfolk were waiting for the storm to flood the streets, and Atala was filling the markets. Although by that point the merchants had packed it in for the night, so it was just a bunch of farmers hanging out in the streets. But you got to take the streets, got to take the markets. So
Gotta get them.
So after quite the trek through the dark tunnels that led through the inverted mountain the city sat on, Gerard and his party finally came to a tunnel with a faint glow at the end of it. Using intuition more than traditional navigation, Gerard decided that the light at the end of that tunnel was as good a place as any to get off the ride. Strangely enough, while they were traveling down that tunnel, one of the crew members found a ring that Squee always wore. With that discovery, they assumed they were on the right track. It's like,
Squee was here.
It's a Squeeze ring.
If you look at it, the inscription says, "Squee was here."
They reached the end of the tunnel, and what they found was another tunnel, but this one was lit every few feet with torches. Then they heard a group of people approaching. It was a small group of Mercadian guards, the magistrate's courtiers, and a single Kieran. Gerard, Sisay, Tongarth, and the rest of them made quick work of the Mercadian group, although at the cost of one of Weatherlight's sailors.
Always one of the Weatherlight crew has to die.
Yeah, I think by the time they leave, it's just going to be like the main bridge crew, because nobody's going to be left. So,
Yeah, I remember at one point you were like, "There's 5 of them left," and I think more than 5 have died or something.
well, two of them died on their trip to. There was 5 of them that went to the Deepwood, and 2 of them died there. So we have 3 left. One of them just died, so we have 2 left now.
All right.
So they hid the bodies, including that of the Weatherlight crew member, and they intended to come back for him when all this was over. And they continued down the torchlit tunnel. They encountered a couple more groups of Mercadians similar to the first one, which they dispatched and hid their bodies before they reached Volrath's secret underground hangar. They knew that Weatherlight had been brought through a set of large doors at the base of the inverted mountain when the Cateran brought it back from the Rushwood weeks earlier. Sisay and Tongarth surmised that in addition to the fleet of Phyrexian vessels housed in the hangar, perhaps Weatherlight was somewhere nearby as well. But Gerard knew, because he had begun to sense when the ship was close by, much the same way Karn could sense nearby legacy artifacts, which might just be bullshit and might be might be a real thing. Maybe he's just, he could be going nuts. You know, it's like when you're listening to the radio, if anybody still listens to the radio, and you know the next song comes on, you're like, I was thinking of that song. I must have powers. So I'm not exactly sure.
Like,
What's going on there.
he just has like a Weatherlight sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Yeah.
Spidey sense, but different.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
see dead ships. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as Gerard and his party performed their clandestine search of the hangar, Hannah and Karn were in the process of repairing Weatherlight's engine. To be clear, it would have only taken them about an hour to figure out. It only took them about an hour to figure out how the power matrix and the Bones of Ramos fit into Weatherlight's engine. But she and Karn made a show of attempting to repair their ship to stall for time while they waited for rescue. Whether Volrath knew their failure at repair was a ploy or not, he was getting tired of waiting. Squee was still hanging from Weatherlight's twin airfoils. He was alive, and Volrath had not thought the goblin would have lasted as long as he had, so he threatened Hannah and Karn that if they didn't finish their repair of the ship immediately, he would use the crossbow he held to kill Squee. While Hannah continued to work on the engine, Karn implored Volrath.
Please be patient. Please, fool.
Volrath hissed, turning angrily on the silver golem.
Vool? Vool? Vool is dead. He was killed by your blessed master. I am not Vool. I am Volrath. Volrath is Vool's corpse, a corpse that wouldn't lie down and die when Gerard killed it. Do not call me Vool.
The crossbow trembled in his grasp.
You are not dead, Vool.
Karn replied placidly.
You still live inside this monstrous shell. Perhaps there is only one nerve of you alive, but I have touched that nerve. Come back, Vool. If you fire that shot, you'll kill Squee, yes, but you'll also kill Vool forever. Put down the crossbow. Come back to life, Vool.
He reached out and grasped Volrath's shoulder. Furious,
Whoa.
Furious, Volrath pulled away from Karn's touch, leveled the crossbow, and fired it at Squee's heart. Luckily for Squee, though, Hannah had effected all necessary repairs of Weatherlight's engines, and she lowered the twin airfoils, holding the goblin just in time to avoid Volrath's bolt. With repairs
Didn't that just all work out?
perfectly. It always comes up Squee.
That's good.
With repairs completed, Volrath ordered his crew be summoned because he planned to leave for Wrath within the hour. Continuing their search for Weatherlight through the hangar, Gerard and his crew found what was basically an armory, bin after bin of goblin bombs that Volrath was planning to load onto his fleet of ships. Some ships had already been loaded, and some still waited for their ordnance. And that's when Gerard got the hot idea to use all the bombs to blow up Volrath's fleet, and in the chaos, escape on Weatherlight. With the discovery of the bombs, Gerard had also spotted Weatherlight among the moored Phyrexian vessels, so everything was falling into place. Gerard planned to use the bombs in the bins to start a chain reaction that would hopefully ignite and or detonate the bombs already loaded on the various Phyrexian ships. With that, they began laying bombs strategically, hoping that once the firestorm began, the guards aboard Weatherlight's deck would scramble off to see what the commotion was about, and once everything was ready and they were set to ignite the first bomb, a loud klaxon overhead rang out. It was an intruder alarm. It ordered all troops to battle stations, and just then, two small skiffs flown by goblins approached Gerard's group. Thinking quickly, Gerard and Sisse each threw one of the bombs they held at one of the skiffs. Both vessels exploded in a white-orange flame and disappeared over a nearby cliff that led down the long, hollow cavern that made up the hangar. They both looked over the cliff and saw that at least one of the larger Phyrexian ships was burning. Then they looked at each other and decided the time had passed for stealth, and they started throwing their bombs at the ships moored below. Seeing their captains abandoning their original plan, Tongarth and the other two sailors joined them in hurtling bombs at any Phyrexian vessel they could reach. And with that, the chain reaction they'd hoped for began. Vessels moored 200 feet below began to ignite and explode, and the firestorm began to climb up the cavern. In addition to all the exploding Phyrexian ships, the structural integrity of the cavern was being tested. Each explosion felt like an earthquake under their feet and caused cracks and fissures to form in the floor and ceiling.
Yeah, when you said that they were setting all these bombs, I was like, aren't they in some sort of like cave or something? Like
Danger.
Danger, Will Robinson.
Yes.
Yeah, well, you work with what you got. So, the original plan had worked, partly. Due to the firestorm of exploding ships, many of the guards that had previously been on Weatherlight's deck had left their posts to find out what was going on, including Volrath. At this point, our heroes had gotten separated in their joint task of destroying Volrath's fleet. Sisse and Gerard were together while Tongarth was with the other two unnamed crew members. Seeing that many of the guards had left their post, Tongarth decided it was a good time to rescue his friends. So we're taking a bit of a sidetrack here. The Ramotian and Cho Aram forces had taken control of the city streets, and Atala also took control of the markets. It's not really important. I don't know why that's in there. They moved on to the magistrate's tower. Lahame and Chomano were the first ones into the magistrate's personal chamber, and they were met with both Mercadian guards and Kieran. They fought. The guards fought to defend the magistrate, and they would have bested the Ramojan and Cho'Aram leaders if it wasn't for Orym. She noticed when Chomano left the battle in the streets, and after tending to some of her injured comrades, she followed her lover. When she burst into the magistrate's chamber, the fat man had a blowpipe containing a poisoned dart aimed at Chomano. She acted fast and threw her sword at the magistrate. Aided by a bit of Cho'Aram magic, the blade severed the wrist of the hand holding the blowpipe. The magistrate screamed at his severed hand, but Orym gave him no time to recover. She quickly crossed the room to the fat man, picked up the blowpipe, clapped it to her lips, and blew the dart straight into the magistrate's neck. He fell to the ground, his eyes rolling back in his head. His fat body jiggled a few more times before he stopped moving for good.
And then he
I would have
died.
liked and then he died. I would have loved the blow dart like into the eye or something, like or something.
Yeah,
more,
yeah.
Something
you know,
ridiculous.
terrifying. Yeah. So while Orym was disposing of the magistrate, Lahame and Chomano were doing the same to his Kieran masters. And when they were finished, the three of them were the only ones left alive in the room. So they could check the magistrate's tower off their list of targets. So getting back to the captives on Weatherlight, Hannah, Karn, and Squee were on deck when the firestorm began. It's unclear if Volrath wanted them executed or if the guards, in the absence of their master, decided to execute them. But as the chaos in the cavern around them continued, one of the guards on Weatherlight's deck ordered Hannah to kneel in front of the ship's railing and place her neck on the railing. When she did, the guard leveled the sword he carried, and as he was about to bring it down on Hannah's neck, she heard a sword tear through flesh, muscle, and bone. Next, she heard the guard's head hit the deck next to her and watched as it rolled toward her kneeling legs. Tongarth had arrived just in time to save them all. He had cut the guard's head clean off, and he proceeded to dispatch the rest of the guards that remained on Weatherlight with the help of his fellow crew members.
Oh yeah.
Once the guards were taken care of, Tongarth removed the shackles that bound his friends. So now they only needed to find Gerard and Sisay, and they could escape Mercadia. With the ship back under their control and repaired, and with the additions of the Matrix and the Bones of Ramos, the Weatherlight was more powerful than ever. They began to prep her for flight. But there were a couple problems with flying out of the cavern. The first one was that the entrance was blocked due to a landslide caused by the explosions. The second was that as they assessed the blocked entryway in the distance, they saw something in the midst of all the burning ships. They had found Gerard and Sisay. Unfortunately, they were surrounded by a mixture of about 40 Mercadian soldiers, Kieran, and Phyrexian dock workers, all at the command of Volrath, who was among the ragtag group. All Hannah and the rest of Weatherlight's crew could do was watch as Volrath's designs unfolded. He's got designs.
Is that Volrath in the picture?
Yeah, he's got designs. He's like, hey,
Yeah.
I got designs.
He's like,
Hey, check out these designs.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he sounds like. Yes.
So Volrath's minions had formed a literal circle around Gerard and Sisay that they could not escape unless they planned to kill most of them. Volrath joined them in the makeshift arena where he and Gerard had one of their famous exchanges. It's not clear exactly when Gerard figured out that Takara had been Volrath, but it's at this point that he let Volrath know he knew. That was also the first time Sisay had any clue that Takara was Volrath, but after thinking about it for a few seconds, it all made sense. It's like, man, she's really a bitch. Would you guys like to share when you suspected that Takara wasn't who she said she was? Or if maybe you knew even before we started doing this series? I'm not sure if I knew. I think I was surprised when I read the book, but I didn't. But yeah, do you guys want to share when you were you surprised?
Yeah, I think
I was surprised.
Yeah, I was surprised. I don't think I had suspicions prior to like her coming out and killing Stark, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think she was Volrath like at all.
Okay, great. Awesome. So with Gerard's apparent realization, he gave Volrath the coward treatment.
So that's where you've been hiding, in someone else's skin, afraid to face me. You truly are a coward, fool.
I was not hiding, brother. I was ripping your spine out from the inside and taking your legacy from the outside. I did not take the form of Takara because I feared you, but because I hated you, and I wanted you to hate yourself. On Wrath, I've made a career of ripping out heroes' spines and replacing them with mimetic hatred. That's what I was doing to you. I am no coward, more a counselor, more a friend pointing out your great and chronic failings and empowering you to overcome them. It would seem you are incorrigible. It would seem you are determined to fail.
You are the one who has failed. Your fleet is destroyed. Your Phyrexian monsters are burning among the ships. Your rule beneath this mountain has ended.
Volrath laughed, pacing back and forth within his circle of soldiers. He actually laughed.
You and Sisse are surrounded and outnumbered 20-1. Your lover Hannah is executed. Your guardian Karn is shackled and held captive. Your perfected ship is mine.
The Evencar spun on his heels, looking directly at Gerard.
You dare pretend I have failed? What is this measly fleet in flames? It was a cheap price to pay for so diverting a masquerade, for this pleasant dance in which I have systematically stripped away everything you loved until you stood naked and helpless, until I killed you.
Volrath drew his own sword.
This moment was inevitable from the time you stole my birthright, brother. Your death is inevitable.
All death is inevitable.
Yeah.
Wow! Dun, dun, dun.
So with that, Gerard lunged forward and fell into another duel with his brother.
It's a Vool duel.
That's right. That's a good one. We'll look at it on a t-shirt. So as they did, Volrath signaled to his guards, and they swarmed Sisse. She killed 4 of them before they disarmed and restrained her. Volrath told both she and Gerard that he wanted Sisse to watch Gerard die, and then he would kill her. As they fought, Volrath revealed that he answered to Yawgmoth, although he never used the name, only calling him the Ineffable, which I really like. I think that's my favorite Yawgmoth nickname.
Yeah, the Ineffable. That's good stuff.
Yeah, it is good.
The Evencar also revealed that the Burning Fleet was the barest sliver of the full force Yawgmoth was planning to use to invade Dominaria with, basically saying that if Gerard thought he'd achieved anything, he hadn't. The brothers were pretty evenly matched, but Gerard had taken a few light stabs and slashes from Volrath's blade. And that's when Gerard remembered something from their childhood. Their father taught them that behind every strength was a weakness, which I don't really think is accurate. But Gerard was the far more. That's not terribly important now, but I just don't think it's. I don't think it's like a hard and fast lesson. Gerard was the far more aggressive fighter, and as a result, his defenses were weaker. Vool, on the other hand, favored his right side when both attacking and defending, which meant his left side was his weak side. Once Volrath left his left side considerably open, Gerard took the opportunity and stabbed Volrath in the chest, sinking his blade deep enough to pierce a lung.
Ooh.
Volrath was actually shocked that his brother could wound him, and in that moment of stunned surprise, Gerard brought his blade down on Volrath's right shoulder like an axe. It tore through his collarbone and chest, and the wound was so deep that it actually met the one in Volrath's lung and created a gaping slash in the Evencar's torso.
Oof.
Whoa.
Volrath stood for another
boy.
moment, still shocked, before he toppled to the ground, where he quickly bled out and finally died.
Okay, sure, yeah. He died.
And then
He died.
And then he died.
and then he died.
But you know what? You tell us someone died, I don't believe you.
I have the R.I.P. though.
Well, that's
R.I.P. Vool.
you also said R.I.P. Orem. You also said R.I.P. Chomana.
and R.I.P. Stark, and he's actually dead.
Oh my god.
So, with Volrath dead, Gerard and Sisse still had the 40-something guards, goblins, and dockworkers to deal with. Gerard quickly dispatched the guards, holding Sisse, helped her to her feet, and they both prepared to defend themselves from the encroaching crowd. And just as Gerard and Sisse were giving each other the "it's been nice knowing you" routine, the crowd surrounding them was bathed in bright red light that vaporized everything it touched. And it came from one of Weatherlight's plasma cannons. It continued to fire on the crowd until only a few guards and Phyrexians remained. Seeing the writing on the walls, they took off, the ones that remained.
Okay. See, it's interesting, like, obviously these books, the emphasis is more so on like the fighting and the action and like, we have like the relationships between sort of our, lead characters like Gerard, and I guess Volrath is kind of like, he's the antagonist.
Gerard Depardieu.
Gerard. But I just feel like, so I read a lot of romance novels, and if the hero had heard from their enemy that their love was dead, like usually there'd be some acknowledgement of that, like in their head, like
Yeah, it's just not the time for that. Like, well, he's gonna worry about that later.
oh, is he
He's
gonna
gotta-
worry about that later?
Yeah, if he needs to. Turns out she's fine though.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
I hear
think,
what you're saying though.
I think Gerard takes everything that Volrath says with like a grain of salt, in the sense that he's a deceptive bastard.
Fair enough, yeah. And yeah, perhaps he's like, I know my brother, he's gonna lie about everything, so I'm not even gonna pay it mind. Could be.
Yeah. So, in the time it took for Gerard to kill Volrath, Hannah, Tongarth, Karn, Squee, and the other two crew members had prepped Weatherlight for flight and trained her cannons on the crowd. They had obviously waited to use them until they were sure they wouldn't hit Gerard or Sisay. But with that taken care of, Gerard and Sisay climbed aboard Weatherlight and took their positions, Sisay at the helm as captain and Gerard as commander at one of the half-dozen cannon ports that pockmark Weatherlight's hull. In the centuries of her existence, Weatherlight had been outfitted with all kinds of weapons, but all those seemed to pale in comparison with the massive Phyrexian plasma cannons that she'd sported after her repair and upgrade at the hands of Volrath's people. Those are what they'd used on the crowd surrounding Gerard and Sisay, and Gerard planned to use them to escape the cavern. Tongarth, Squee, and the other two crew members also littered the gun ports, while Hannah sat at the navigator's desk. Karn was, of course, connected to Weatherlight's engine in the belly of the ship, and when he was in that state, Weatherlight became his body, and he could control it as though it were. Just one more feature that made her as deadly as she was unique.
Pew pew.
So with the Phyrexian cannons powered by Weatherlight's new, more powerful engine, they proceeded to melt the rock slide that sealed the cavern they were in. And over the following few hours, they blasted their way out of the subterranean hangar. And guess what, guys? Volrath wasn't dead.
Knew it.
Uh-oh. What a twist.
What a twist.
So he was playing dead though. It's not a shapeshifter this time, and because he because he was a shapeshifter, he'd made Gerard's killing stroke look far worse than it was. Although another injury like the one Gerard had inflicted on him probably would have killed him. He was able to stitch his tissue and bone back together. He waited until Weatherlight left the cavern before he'd begun the process. But once he was well enough to stand again, he traveled to another secret cavern where his flagship, the Recreant, waited. In the time it took Weatherlight to escape the mountain, Volrath scraped a crew together and went after his brother and his much larger airship.
Hey, bro, I heard you like caverns, so I put a cavern in your cavern so you can cavern while you cavern.
It was early morning by the time Weatherlight escaped the crumbling cavern beneath Mercadia City, and by then, the rebellion in the city streets had completely overthrown their Kieran masters. Unfortunately, though, like many rebellions, the oppressed were becoming oppressors. The revolutionaries were taking the law into their own hands. In fact, Chomano stopped a mass execution of Mercadian guards that was about to take place. Stuff like that. Kind of think of like the last episode of Game of Thrones. Even though
Just like chaos.
Pretty rough. So many of the citizens that weren't involved in the revolution used the chaos to settle personal scores. One man actually murdered his grandfather, who had willed all his wealth to him in order to inherit it sooner. Chaos breeds opportunity. Anyway, Chomano gave a convincing speech to the collected Mercadian people regarding Ramos, the Uniter. He basically said that because the Uniter had seemingly not returned, maybe they were the Uniter. All those different factions joined together in a common cause, driving out the evil of Mercadia. Sounds like a uniter. So Chomano implored the people to stop the fighting now, and that they'd vanquish their former masters, when a sudden thunderous sound rang out from beneath them, followed by a geyser of flame streaking across the sky above them. And the crowd thought it was Ramos. They began to chant his name, and the fighting stopped. Orym, on the other hand, knew it was her ship, Weatherlight, chased by a much larger Phyrexian airship. Recreant was almost as fast as Weatherlight and outfitted with far more plasma cannons, but its bulk made it quite a bit less maneuverable. Volrath's ship fired at Weatherlight almost continuously while it pursued it, but the smaller ship was able to avoid any serious damage and was actually able to damage the larger vessel. Not mortally, though. Realizing that they couldn't win in a head-on fight, Gerard ordered Karn and Sisay to climb. Like I mentioned, Weatherlight was the faster ship, but it was also smaller, and as it climbed higher, Recreant followed, having to pull all the extra bulk as it did. That maneuver by Weatherlight was also effective in dissipating the destructive capability of Recreant's plasma blasts. The position of the flying directly upward made it difficult for Weatherlight to hit Recreant with its blasts, though, so Gerard ordered Karn to kill the engine and divert all power to the forward cannon where Squee was positioned. Weatherlight stopped in midair and turned so that the tip of her bow was pointed directly at the fast-approaching Phyrexian vessel. Gerard ordered Squee to fire his cannon at Recreant, and the goblin obeyed. The plasma blast melted a hole clean through Recreant due to all of Weatherlight's power diverting to Squee's cannon. Then Weatherlight fell through what was left of Recreant while Squee continued to fire his cannon the entire time.
Nice.
He's like, what?
He's having a good time. Yeah.
Grand old time.
Weatherlight destroyed Recreant's engine on its way out, and the only thing left of the larger vessel was the bow where Volrath hung on as it fell toward the Mercadian plain. As it did, Volrath knew the impact would probably kill him, so he rushed to his quarters and removed the portal device he'd affixed to the wall. He calmly activated it and stepped into the open portal. That single, simple movement took him out of death and out of Mercadia. He returned, a whipped dog, to his throne on Wrath.
Ooh.
Yeah, you just can't.
Well,
you
he's still
just
alive.
can't kill this guy. He's hard to kill.
Yeah.
Hard to kill. So Gerard ordered Weatherlight's engines to re-engage and climb higher because there was another ship approaching the city, and Gerard planned to attack it from above. But it was just Ramos, though. So as soon as he saw that it was the dragon engine, he broke off the attack. And
Don't shoot.
And like, and Eric, per your question about like how can he fly without the core and everything, I don't know. I was wondering the same thing because he's
Okay.
like,
Yeah,
I can't
like-
rise, but I'm rising. I think the answer is just that he didn't want to. He just there's really no other explanation.
Yeah, he was just being a sad dragon.
Yeah. And in terms of the fate of Mercadia and then the Kieran being overthrown, I guess we can assume that things just worked out really well because Mercadia is like 9 on the Rabia scale, so we're probably never going to go back there. So we can just assume that everything worked out. So with Ramos's return, Gerard ordered Weatherlight to land somewhere far from the city because there was no need to confuse the people, and it was probably better to let them think Weatherlight was some god rather than a flying ship.
Like Santa.
That's right. And
Yeah.
and 2 days later, they were ready to go home. Orym had rejoined her crew, Weatherlight was provisioned for the journey, and all necessary repairs were made. Orym wanted to stay with Chomano, but she felt her place was aboard Weatherlight until they'd assembled the Legacy or ended the Phyrexian threat, and the Cho-Aram leader told her that when her time with Weatherlight ended, she should return to Rushwood so they might spend their lives together.
Aw.
Hey.
And before they parted, Chomano gave Gerard a vial of water that came from the navel of the world, and he told Gerard,
I do not know your destiny. Your future stands at a place where many paths cross, and I cannot see which way you will take. But in dark moments, think of the navel of the world, and you will find comfort.
That's good advice, I think. We can all apply that to our daily lives. I don't really know what it means.
Does the world have a belly button?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I don't
Just
know.
Picturing a little belly button on a globe.
I don't know if it does. I don't know. So with that, they climbed aboard Weatherlight, and the ship quickly rose into the clouds before disappearing into an interplanar portal. Sisay had been restored to her place as captain, the Legacy had been recovered, and Weatherlight was sailing home to Dominaria. Gerard focused on the debts he'd settled and those he'd soon collect. And that's Mercadian Masques.
Hey.
Hey,
So one thing I liked was that there was actually a part where I think it's when Volrath is talking, yeah, and he said he actually like calls the undertaking that he did, like being Takara, he calls it a masquerade, which is fun because I think that's sort of homage to the title of the book, right?
Yeah, and the whole cycle of books is the Masquerade cycle.
Yeah.
So we're gonna be, the next book is Nemesis. So we're gonna be covering that in probably several weeks. And that's where we're gonna find out about like what happened to Krovax and Erte back on Wrath. So that book is all Wrath centric. The way this book we didn't talk about those characters at all. In the next book we're not going to talk about these characters at all.
So no Gerard in the next book?
No Gerard in the next book. No Gerard for the next couple of books.
Oh.
Yeah. Because
I like 'em.
this trilogy of books, it's like all these events are happening simultaneously, but they're just 3 separate stories.
Right.
But they're all sort of loosely connected. I actually don't really know what Prophecy's about. That'll be an interesting read. At least I hope so. So as always, everyone, thank you for listening. Ainsley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And if you want to catch up on our previous lore episodes, our full library of episodes is on all major podcast platforms. We have a playlist on YouTube that's just lore episodes, among other topics that we cover regularly. And we'll be back next week to I think we'll be doing our D&D set review. We'll be starting that, I'm pretty sure, because now that the set is fully spoiled, we can get to it. We like to wait until it's fully spoiled. Hope you enjoyed this series, and until then, just take it easy out there.
Yeah, you better take it easy.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Take it hard.
Take it any way you can get it. All right, bye everybody.
See ya. Don't let them squish you like a sausage.
Turn 1 Soul Ring.